Yo, in this video, I'll teach you how to make a spectation system. And if you follow along, you'll end up with this exact same spectation system. And with the knowledge you'll learn in this video, you'll be able to adjust some stuff in it. And I mean later, you could even make your own from scratch. So let's get started in Roblox Studio by picking any of your games. And now that you have your game, we have to first of all make the spectation button. And how you do that is you go over to workspace, you go over to the plus icon, and then you want a screen GUI. Then you move your screen GUI over to starter GUI so that you can see it, and every player gets a starter GUI into their player GUI. It works the same way as a starter player script does, so that each player gets a copy of the script when the game starts. And then in our screen GUI, we'll make an image button. And then you can just move it wherever you like. I like my spectation button over at the left side of my screen. And now let's just check that, yes, it uses the scale instead of the offset. And the difference is that scale is proportional to every screen size, whilst offset will always be the same size no matter the screen. So if you're using offset, be really careful and mindful of mobile players, because the button will be huge for them. And if you make it really small for the mobile players, then it will be also small for computer players. So that's why I always prefer to use scale when possible. And now we want the picture, so we go over to the properties, and then you go to image, and then here at image, it's asking for a code. And where you get these codes is in Roblox, if you go to create, and then to the store, then decals, and then you can search for whatever you like. And I think I used this one. Then you go over to that URL and you take the code that comes after asset. You do Ctrl+C to copy it. And then you go back into Roblox Studio, you go over to your image, and then just copy paste the code. And now if you don't like this white background you have, you can turn it off by going to data again, and then you have background transparency, and then just move that all the way up to 1. And then let's call this button spectate button. Then let's make the arrow buttons. We'll go over to our screen GUI and we'll make a frame. Why are we making a frame? Well, because we want to turn off the button at the same time. Now the frame can be really small because we don't actually need it, and you can just turn it transparent so you won't see it. But within the frame, we'll take a image button, move it over here, and then just duplicate it. Check that they're about equal, and just move it here to the other side. And now this will be our right button, so we'll rename it and call it right arrow. And then the other one will be left arrow. And now, as you can see at the frame, you can turn it on and off at the same time, so you don't have to go to the buttons and specifically turn them on and off. And that's why we created the frame. And now we need the decals for the arrows, so I'll just put them in the description and also on the screen whilst I paste them in case you want to use the same ones that I did. And now I'm just lowering the transparency, or dragging it all the way up to 1. And there we go. Then, because we don't want the arrows to pop up until the player is in spectation mode, we'll just turn the frame's visibility off for now. Now we're ready to make the script, so we go to Screen GUI and we'll just put a local script in. And then we can just name this spectate script. The first thing we need is the GUI service. So local GUI service is game get service and GUI service. Then we need the current player, which a local script can always find the local player. So we'll do local player is game get service, player service, and from the player service we can get the local player. And finally we need the local player's camera, because we'll have to be able to change their camera angle, and we can get the camera by doing game.workspace.current camera. And this works because if I go and play, you'll see that every player has their own camera in the workspace. So we're just accessing that pretty much. Additionally, we'll need all the buttons, which we can get by doing local spectate button. And then you can see the structure here. We have the spectate script in the screen GUI. And within the screen GUI, we have the spectate button. So we can just do script.parent, which is the screen GUI. And then from the screen GUI, we can find the spectate button. And similarly, we can do the same to get the frame. And then from the frame, we can get the right arrow and the left arrow. And now we have pretty much all our variables. So we'll check if the player wants to spectate. So if they've clicked the spectation button. And this we can do by spectate button.activated, fires when the button is activated. Connect function. And then we'll run another function which will just be spectating. Now the spectating function doesn't exist yet, so we'll have to make it. And how you make functions is you do local function and then the name of the function you want to create, and then you just add a space and it ends. And one thing I forgot is with buttons, when you click them it always runs the same thing. But we want to use the spectation button so that when the player clicks it the first time, they enter the spectation mode, and when they click it the second time, they exit it. So we want the arrows to appear and to disappear, and also for them to start spectating and stop spectating. So we'll make another variable, and we'll call it isSpectating, and by default it will be false because the player won't join the game spectating someone. And then here we'll check if not spectating. So if not is spectating, then we can start spectating someone. And else we know that they are already spectating someone and they're clicking it to stop spectating. So we'll do else and we'll do stop spectating. And once again, we need to create this function because it does not exist in Roblox by default. So local function stop. Now the first thing that happens is when spectating runs, we know that isSpectating will be true. Secondly, we want to enable the arrows frame. So arrows frame.visible is true. And now we'll start by getting all the possible players that you can spectate. And this we'll do by getting, first of all, the local players, which is just game get service, players, get players. So it returns a table of all presently connected player objects in the game. And now we don't want to spectate ourselves, that's kind of weird. So we'll remove ourselves from the list. So we'll do for index and player, because it's a table with first the index and then the player. In iPairs, players. So we'll be going through the players list in this loop. Do, and if the player is equal to the local player that we defined over here, then we'll do table.remove from the players table the position I So the index I, which will be here defined with that player. And then we can just break from this loop once we're done, because we're not looking for anything else. And now that we've done this, we know that the list of players we have remaining will only include the players that we want to spectate, and this will be the player max count. So we want a loop that will be iterating through and through again and again, and we need to know which value of it we are currently on. So we'll do player max count and then hashtag and players. And actually it might be better to define this in the start of the script. And obviously when the script starts, this will be 0. Now then we'll change the camera from our current local player to the player who's the first player in the list. So camera.camera subject will be players list, and then we need that one in the first place, so we'll create a variable for that. We'll just call it the player index, and it'll start at 1 because the list starts at 1, player 2, player 3. And when we use these square brackets, that means we're going for a specific index, or like the specific position of the element in the list, and this will be equal to the player index. Because the camera subject needs a humanoid, we'll find the character, and then we'll find the humanoid of that character who is in that players list in the current player index, which will be 1 by default. Now then, we want the player to be able to use the arrows to navigate from one player to another and choose who they're spectating. So similarly to the spectate button activated, we can just do right arrow dot activated, connect function, and end. And how moving from one player to another will work will be just by changing the player index. So we're changing the player that we're accessing from the players list. And this is really easy. We'll just do if player index is less than the player max index, or player max count, sorry, then we know that we're not at the end of our list yet. So if the list goes here, we might be at player 1 and we might have a max count of 5. So then we can just do player index and then we add 1 to it. This essentially means that player index will be equal to player index plus 1, but it's just a shortcut for writing it. And else we know that either something is wrong, or then that we are at the maximum, we can't go further anymore, so we'll set the player index to 1 again. And then this won't actually change anything because we need it to loop back to a camera subject change. So we'll have a function called switch camera, but it doesn't exist yet, so we'll just define it here. But for now, we want the same thing to happen when you click the left arrow. So we'll change this to left arrow. Apparently it's left arrows, not arrow, my bad. We'll just change that to left arrow. But now there are some changes because this would essentially be another right arrow. So this time we'll be checking if the player index is greater than 1, so if we can move backwards in the list. And if it's not, then we know that we are the first person at the list, in which case we'll set the player index to the max player count. So player max count. Now all that's really left is the switching camera function. And we'll start implementing it because writing these square brackets every time is kind of annoying. So we'll do local current current spectating, and then we'll do the players list and the current player index. And as you can see, because we call it after we've changed the index, we get a new player here than the one that we had previously. And then we'll just check if the current player that we're spectating has a character. So then if this isn't nil, we'll continue to here. And then we can just change the camera subject. So camera.camera subject is equal to current spec and then character, find first child and humanoid. And this is because, as I said, the camera subject requires a humanoid. And then the question is, what if this player decides to leave the game? Well, if they leave here, then we're kind of ruined. Actually, no, we're not. We can just do players and player index, and then we'll do dot character removing, and then we'll connect it to a function where we'll just switch the camera. Except that this doesn't exist yet, so we'll just move this over to when switch camera does exist. And there we go, problem solved. Except that you also want to move it, the player index, so you can take something from the right arrow and then just put that here. So similarly as we did here, we'll check if the player decides to leave, but now we have an actual name for it, so we can do current spec dot character removing connect function, and do not do that. And then here we can just run the same script as we did here. And now everything should work decently, except that we don't have a stop spectating, so we'll do that first. And now when we stop spectating, is spectating will be turned to false, so that when the player clicks this, they'll be able to spectate again. And then we can just reset the player max count to 0 and the player index to 1. And then finally we'll move the camera subject back to the original player. So camera.camera subject is player.character, find first child, and humanoid. And by the way, a lot of errors come when you have these parts that don't auto-correct. So if you have an error, if your code isn't working, just come back here and make sure you've typed every single humanoid correctly. You have the players typed in correctly and capitalized, and so on and so forth. And yeah, now we're pretty much good, but there's one problem remaining, and it's with the right arrow activated and the left arrow activated. So when you activate them once, for some reason they stack. So if you activate it and then you leave spectation mode, it'll for some reason still be activated, or like it'll still exist. And then when you click it again, you'll start clicking it like twice every time you click it, and then eventually you'll be clicking it like 4 times, and you'll be skipping over 4 players every time you try and click it, and actually it might not even work. And for that reason, we'll connect it to a variable, and then we'll disconnect that variable from the function so that we get a new one every time that the player enters and exits spectating mode. So we'll do local left arrow connect and local right arrow connect. Then when you use these functions, you'll have right arrow connect equal to whatever happens here, and same goes with the left arrow connect. And then when you stop spectating, you check if the player used both of the arrows or even one of the arrows during that during the last time that they were spectating. So you'll do if left arrow connect, then we'll disconnect that. Disconnect, and then we'll set it back to nil. And as you can see here, we haven't connected them to anything because they are already nil. But yeah, and then we'll do the same thing for the right arrow connect. And now the last thing you might consider doing is adding a task.wait and maybe like 2 seconds. So this means that the code won't run until 2 seconds have passed, and that's so that we can just ensure that everything exists in the game the moment the players decide to click the spectate button. Oh, and also if you don't want the player to be able to walk when spectating someone else, you can go over to spectating, and whenever spectating is true, you can just do player.character find first child humanoid dot walk speed, and you can set that to 0. So now the player can't walk when they're spectating, because even if they try to click W or move their walking Joy-Con or whatever, they will technically be moving and giving the command to walk, but because their walk speed is 0, they won't be able to get anywhere. And then when they stop spectating, just make sure that they are able to walk again. So you can put it back to 16, which is the default walking speed, or if your game has a special one, then put that here. Also, one thing I forgot to do in the stop spectating is you want to turn the arrows off again. So do arrows frame dot visible and false. And now to check if it works, I'll start a test server with 3 players over from the test tab. Also, the left arrow connect has a small error. This is supposed to be a minus so that we actually move backwards in the list, not forward, because otherwise this is kind of weird. So here we have our 3 players. Player 2 here clicks the spectating button, and they immediately go and spectate player 1. And then I click the arrows, I move, yeah, and I can exit, I can enter, perfect. One thing that I forgot to mention is that if you think the free camera mode, so that the player can rotate around the player that they're spectating, is a bit awkward, you can actually change that. And how you change it is you go over to where you define the camera subject, and this has to happen before you define the subject. You write camera.cameraType, and then is equal to enum, and then camera type, and then you can choose any of these. You can experiment with them, and attach is a pretty good option. It means that you're following the player from the back and you can't rotate your camera. But if you do not like that one, you try it, you don't like it, go over to scriptable, and then you'll have to script it yourself. I won't be showing how to do that in this video, but I'm sure you can find other tutorials that teach you how to use a scriptable camera type on YouTube or even in the Lua documentations. And then if you decide to use, for example, attach, just make sure to also come back to the stop spectating, and this happens before you change the camera subject, and then you'll turn it back to custom, which is the normal mode. So yeah, that's it for this video. If you have any problems, if your script for some reason doesn't work, check some of the code, and if you can't find any errors, go over to View, Output, run the code, and then you'll have an output bar here which will show if something isn't working or if there's an error, and then you can comment that error and I'll help you in the comments. And yeah, thanks for watching.